capital market probe report, which we had here on this program with the chairman of the probe panel. El-Sudi is the MD of AMCON, Mustafa Chike-Obi. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, AMCON popped up so many times on that particular report, and we felt it was proper we ask you some of those questions that people have been talking about. How well did you receive the report, just to start with?
Before I talk about the report, let me just say that we at AMCON appreciate the role the National Assembly plays in Nigerian government. We welcome oversight if it's done responsibly. I've read this report several times, and it's quite saddening to me that this report is so full of inaccuracies and errors. And I'm here to try to correct some of those errors without necessarily demeaning or limiting the important role the National Assembly plays.
Well, anyway, when they got off, I'm talking about the El-Sudi panel, were you at any point in time invited?
I was invited to the El-Sudi panel, and I was asked questions for about an hour, and we had no further communication or any follow-up questions from the panel. Many of the things he says in the report about AMCON could have been easily corrected with one or two follow-up phone calls or a re-invitation. But I think he preferred to write his report with very little information, with a 1-hour interview about AMCON, and it's quite saddening that a report from the National Assembly can be full of such clear inaccuracies.
Well, one thing I do remember was that when you were invited initially, the very first invitation, when you're allowed to give your presentation, you felt very strongly that your organization had no role to play in that particular probe, as it wasn't in existence before the collapse of the capital market. But it turns out that apparently they also needed your input as well. Do you think that that initial reluctance to be a part of the probe report could also have informed the attitude towards you?
Well, I wasn't reluctant. I've been in National Assembly this year over 10 times. What I was saying to the panel, because they swore us in under oath, and in every country in the world, when you're supposed to give a statement under oath, is either you were there, or your institution was in existence at the time, or you are called as an expert witness. I tried to clarify from the panel, because I was under oath, whether I was testifying as an expert witness or as somebody who was there when these events occurred. And it's a legal right that you cannot testify about something you were not present or knew something about. As soon as I said that, I got insulted, I was called incompetent, I was called arrogant, I think you called me cheeky. And it's a legal matter that when you testify under oath, you're either an expert witness or everything else you say, if you are not, there's hearsay. I was trying to clarify that point. And I think it's my legal right to clarify that point.
But do you think that with benefit of hindsight and all that has been said in this report about AMCON and the role it has had to play in terms of reviving the capital market, even though it wasn't there during the collapse, do you think that with benefit of hindsight, you really did have a lot to give to the committee?
Unfortunately, I was told it was a probe into the near collapse of the capital markets. That was what I was invited to talk about. I wasn't invited to talk about AMCON. What you should know is that there was a House resolution in November 2011, which most of the members of this panel voted for, that empowered the standing committee, the Committee on Banking and Other Financial Institutions, to look into these same matters they were asking me about. That committee, led by Chairman Onyerere, is very competent. We've talked to them several times on these issues. They have most of the answers. And so I did not expect that I'll be asked questions that was already by the same House resolution before the standing committee. So on the issue of capital markets, the topic of the probe, I don't think I could have added much more than I did.
Well, if we have to go to 3, which is they're trying to say that some of those unethical practices, abuse of office, I'm quoting them now, and various unacceptable bad corporate governance precedents, the transaction should be reviewed and investigation be carried out by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission and other security agencies, and they had to just list names A, B. B, that's where your name appeared. Mustafa Chike-Obi, Managing Director, Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria, and Lamido Sanusi and others. It continues. And they went further outside that of CBN. They talked about some other issues concerning loans as well as the sale of those three banks. First, let's look at the banks issue now, because what's the role of AMCON in the sale of those three banks?
The three banks, I think that, first of all, AMCON is not a regulator. So all the regulatory aspects of that transaction, AMCON was not involved, which is to breach the banks, which is an NDIC, not just a mandate. They must protect depositors. So the breaching of the banks was done by the NDIC in consultation with CBN, a thoroughly legal act. After the breaching occurred, AMCON was called upon to capitalize the bank. Our only role was to capitalize the breach banks, because those breach banks had negative capital. So we came in and we capitalized the banks. That's all we did. It's entirely consistent with the AMCON Act, sections 5B and 6C, that says we must do that. So we capitalized the bank completely legally. Additionally, courts have ruled on the matter. Judge Achibong ruled that it was not just proper and legal, but that CBN could not be expected to stand by and watch depositors' monies at risk. Additionally, two of those old banks have been wound down by court. The winding down procedure, you have to show the court why a bank was wound down. So AfriBank has been wound down, and Bank PHB has been wound down, and probably in the next week or so, Spring Bank will be wound down entirely as a legal matter.
Okay, so the winding down was still continuing even after the bridging had been done,
Yes.
because there was this controversy over the fact that it was done within the space of 3 days over the weekend. By Monday, the names of the banks were already changed. In fact, if I remember very clearly, there was also some controversy over the use of the word nationalization.
Yes.
Some people were reluctant to use the word nationalization, while I think it was the chairman of the NDIC who says he has absolutely no problem using that word nationalization. Did you have a problem using that word nationalization?
I have, because the banks were not nationalized.
What was done? The banks were breached?
The banks were breached and recapitalized. Now,
with whose money?
Well, you see, the notion that if something is owned by a government entity that is nationalized is inaccurate. A government entity can own something in many ways. For example, a government entity can buy something. That doesn't mean it's nationalized, even though it's owned by the government entity. AMCON, to be precise, can own things in many ways. If we have a debt and we enforce the debt, we end up with the asset, be it a manufacturing company, be it an airline. That's not nationalization. What AMCON did was capitalize something, we paid for it, and then we owned it. Nationalization by law means a forcible seizure of private assets. That never happened here.